We've heard that the windows are painted so that you can't see out. And every morning, several of those airplanes take off from a special terminal at McCarran Airport in Las Vegas and fly directly to Area 51. At night, they return and bring the employees back again. I know that when the stealth fighter, the F-117, was developed, and that piece of equipment goes back to the 1970s. We found out about it in the Gulf War in 1991. But the pilots that flew that thing, and it was up at Area 51 for 8 or 10 years, the pilots couldn't even tell their wives what they were doing. The security is that high that family members can't even be told what people that work there do.
That's extraordinary you can, with so many people involved in a project, that you can keep the lid on it at all, because people just naturally like to gossip, don't they?
Well, I couldn't work there because I like to talk too much.
See, we understand each other.
But you stop and think. The United States has a lot of experience at this. The atomic bomb developed here in New Mexico involved some 50,000 people for about 10 years and was never known. The stealth F-117 I just mentioned was on the drawing board in 1973. We found out about it 18 years later in 1991. The code during the Second World War was kept secret for 10 or 15 years after the war. So secrets can be kept. I agree with you, it would be hard for me, but you sign papers when you go to work there. I know the signs at the entrance to the base, there's several signs. One says the use of deadly force is authorized. They talk about different federal codes that the fine is somewhere $500 or $1,000. The jail sentence is 6 months or a year, depending. If you cross that border, that's what you're facing. And probably they will know where you're at for the rest of your life.
Wow. Did they use Groom Lake, or whatever, under whatever name, for development of the B-2 bomber?
All airplanes, all classified airplanes, since the U-2 back in 1950s, have been test flown at Area 51. That includes the B-1, the B-2, the Stealth F-117, the A-10, the A-12, the SR-71 Blackbird. Those were all test flown at Area 51 without any knowledge of the public.
It's such a huge country, America, and it's very difficult for most Europeans to think about having a base that is virtually impossible to get to, even without highly visible security. It's still
in May, I went up there for the first time to actual be in the area, and you have 50 to 75 to 80 miles of nothing, where you're driving on a straight road, and you may not even see another car during that traverse that distance. The base itself has very few entrances, and the airspace is restricted. If you're flying anywhere close to that, the control tower will notify you that you are getting into restricted airspace, and you're warned one time to stay away. If you don't, you're met by an F-16. The security is extremely serious. And, people have kidded, well, I'm going to go across. There's no fence. It's just got markers about every 50 yards. There's actually no fence there. But people said, well, I'm going to go across. And I tell them, don't push it, because they are serious.
It's a very interesting coexistence. There's the sign that refers to extraterrestrial highway. Mm-hmm. And so they're terribly open about it. And quite jokey, and I think there are diners that are UFO diners that are on the extraterrestrial highway. Is that right? But just off the motorway, the laughs stop.
Well, that's probably the best way to keep the secret, is to, let it run its course up to a point, I think. The same thing's true with the Roswell incident. I really don't believe that the government has to cover it up anymore, because us researchers have done such a sloppy job of researching it that I spent way too much time putting out fires, so to speak, on the Internet, because people... Well, I'll give you an example. There's 2,000 websites on Roswell.
Are there really?
At least 2,000 websites. I have one of the top 10 websites. But that means that people that have never been to Roswell, never interviewed a witness, have no idea where the crash sites are are doing websites on Roswell.
I'm going to put your website address details out in a minute, so we can't have you not being number one. We've got to have maximum attendance for you.
Thank you.
There doesn't seem, on first glance, because I did about 4 or 5 hours on this about 11 years ago, at first glance, doesn't seem to be too much going on. And then the further you dig into it, you realise that it was a very quick cover-up operation, if that's the best way to describe it. I mean, substituting a weather balloon, and almost to the extent that the people looking at it must have thought, well, did I see that? Or perhaps they're right, perhaps I didn't see it.
The cover-up was about 3 days. From the time that it was made public, there was a newspaper article went out on July 8, 1947, in all the newspapers, the afternoon edition newspapers west of Chicago, saying, we have a flying saucer in our possession. The only time in the history of the United States that the media has said, we have one in our possession. The next morning, General Ramey came out with the weather balloon story. That went out on all papers east of Chicago in the morning edition on July 9th. People that live here in Roswell, surprisingly, don't know anything about it. The main reason for that is that with Walker Air Force Base, or Roswell Army Airfield then, being here 6 miles south of town, constantly the military was bringing crashed aircraft through town, covered up on flatbed trucks with tarps over them and things like that. They could have brought this craft into downtown Roswell and nobody would have paid attention to it. But the more important thing to me is the change in attitude, the change in things today compared to 60 years ago. 60 years ago, we just came out of the Second World War. People respected and trusted the government. Unfortunately, today we don't have that. But trust is something you have to earn, and we have very few politicians here that earn it today. So life was totally different back then. And if you were told it was a weather balloon by a general of the United States Army Air Force, you accepted that. And then the story died and didn't start again until 1978 when Stanton Friedman found Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer in Louisiana, interviewed him, and the research began again.
Did you, or do you have any recollection of those figures that were alleged to have been the occupants of the craft that crashed at Roswell in 1947? Perhaps you recall about 11 years ago. Did you see them?
The number of occupants?
No, I think there were supposed to have been 4 of them, but somebody produced a film.
Oh, yeah, the alien autopsy?
Yes.
Yes, that's Santilli. We're convinced that is a hoax. That's a complete fake. And we think, we being researchers, serious researchers, I wouldn't be surprised if the government didn't put that out. Put it out, get it popularized, and then debunk it.
Yes, it's a bit like playing poker, isn't it, really?
Yeah, exactly.
You've got to laugh when you've got a bad hand.
I mean, we've had 4 excuses for the Roswell incident over the last 60 years, and I fully expect within the next 10 years we'll probably have another one. They came out with the actual first newspaper article saying we captured a flying saucer. The next day it was a weather balloon. And then in 1994 they said, no, it wasn't aliens, it wasn't a weather balloon, it was a mogul balloon used to check on the Russians to see if they were doing any atomic testing. Well, the problem with that story is the Russians didn't do any testing until 1949, 2 years after the incident. And then that came out 2 weeks before the 50th anniversary, so the timing by the Air Force was exceptional. And then in 1997, they came out with this crash test dummy, the anthropomorphic dummies. They said that they had never addressed the bodies, what they were being reported, and they were anthropomorphic test dummies. Well, the test dummies weren't used till 1953, 6 years after the incident. So the Air Force continues to shoot themselves in the foot.
Is there somebody coordinating their veneer of secrecy, or are there various agencies that are tripping over each other, do you think?
It could be both. I met Edgar Mitchell several years ago, the astronaut, 6th man on the moon, and I had heard that he knew something about Roswell, and I got to meet him and actually got to talk to him one-on-one, And I flat asked him, what do you know about the Roswell incident? And he said, it happened, but that's all I'll tell you. He said, I have from reliable sources that it did happen. And then we got to talking about the government, and he said that we have two governments. We have a elected government, and we have a black government. The black government controls things. This could go back to the Roswell incident, to Harry Truman, President Truman's Majestic 12 group. None of them are still alive, but I would think that we probably have a group today that would be doing something similar under a different name. And I wouldn't be surprised if, and I'm going to get myself in trouble for this, but I wouldn't be surprised if two people that would be on that group would probably be Henry Kissinger and George Bush Sr. And the reason I say Bush is he was head of the CIA before he became president.
That's right.
He's one of the few presidents that probably knows information about UFOs. And that's surprising to many people because the president does not know about this other than probably being briefed somewhat. And the reason for that is that he can't be trusted. He's a temporary employee. He's president for a maximum of 8 years. He does not have the security clearance for this, and consequently probably doesn't know much about it other than what he's briefed on. Every president since Truman has tried to open this stuff up and have failed miserably. Jimmy Carter actually had a sighting as a governor of Georgia, made a report to the Mutual UFO Network, promised to open it up. Ford tried to open it up. Reagan came close. President Reagan addressed the United Nations and talked about maybe we need something from outer space to bring us together on Earth, and was told don't ever make a statement like that again. He had a meeting with Gorbachev, the Russian premier, where they talked about UFOs. He had a sighting himself in California when he was governor. Bill Clinton, when he became president, had two requests. He wanted to know about the Kennedy assassination, and he wanted to know about the Roswell incident. He had one of his aides do some checking, a guy by the name of Hubble. He came back to President Clinton and said, I'm being stonewalled. I can't find any information. We had a Congressman Schiff from New Mexico, went to the General Accounting Office in Washington, had the FBI, Department of Defense, the NSA, all the big agencies investigating Roswell incident, and they gave him a little report back saying that all the incoming and outgoing messages from Roswell Army Airfield between 1945 and 1949 were destroyed by somebody. They don't know who or why. The group that was stationed here in 1947 that was involved with the incident was the 509th Bomb Wing. Those guys dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, to end the Second World War.
Because the Enola Gay flew out of there, didn't it?
Right. They were stationed here. They came from Tinian in the Pacific after they dropped the bombs and were stationed here in Roswell, and were the guys that were involved. These were not typical GIs. These were the best we had, the best pilots, best navigators. They certainly knew the difference between a weather balloon and a flying saucer.
We're going to pause for just a moment and maybe both have a glass of water.
Okay. Am I wearing you out?
No, I'm fascinated in broadcasting terms. You know, if I were, to put this into words myself, as listening, it's pure gold. And it's incredible. It's so detailed, and I'm not ever met anyone who's an investigator of anything, who's as acutely aware of the ramifications of this and the connections. It's just brilliant. I want to talk to you about the connection of the nuclear bomb and Roswell and the craft, and in just a moment. I also want to remind everyone, if you would like to speak to Dennis Balthaser, now is a good time to pick up the phone, 08704 20 20 20, or you can text me on 81089 if you would rather I ask the question on your behalf, or you can email me, all the W's, .talksport.net, or 08704 20 20 20.
The Weekend Sports Breakfast with Andy Townsend.
Are you not trying to tell us something?
And Mike Parry.
No, nothing at all.
Tomorrow morning from 8 on talkSPORT.
Commentary is a very serious business. I think you've got to be extremely careful what you say.
The Weekend Breakfast show that strives for journalistic accuracy and unprejudiced impartiality.
I'm not being sort of, Little Englander here. I'm not being anti-Johnny Foreigner.
Hold on a minute. A bit of Alf Garnett there.
The Weekend Sports Breakfast with Andy Townsend and Mike Parry. Tomorrow morning from 8 on talkSPORT.
talkSPORT, the radio station for men who know how to put a shelf up across the UK on dome-headed, chrome-plated, 1.5" 8 DAB digital radio and bog standard unplated 3/4" 6s, 1089 and 1053 AM. talkSPORT.
UFO investigator, researcher and lecturer Dennis Balthaser has said yes, he will be with us tonight. He's talking across the whole of the UK, coast to coast, from sea to shining sea, I think the expression is, Dennis, in America, isn't it? Now, I wanted to just check, when I was a few years younger, I thought to myself when I discovered that Enola Gay had been photographed at Roswell, I thought, could there be a connection between the arrival of alien beings, assuming that's what happened at Roswell, and I'm just presenting that with the alternative view, all right, so don't misread me, and the fact that the craft that had dropped those 2 bombs, or at least one of them, was home-based at Roswell?
That's a good assumption. The atomic bomb was tested at Trinity Site at White Sands Missile Range, which is less than 100 miles from Roswell. If, in fact, they were sitting out there watching us and they saw this mushroom cloud, they may have wondered, what are these clowns up to here on Earth? The 509th has been richly rewarded. I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but the B-2 stealth bomber, the bat-looking new bomber we have,
yes,
that is the 509th.
Is it?
They are still active.
I thought they were. I'm sorry. I thought they threw out of Missouri.
They're stationed out of Missouri, and they are the same 509th bomb wing that was stationed here and dropped the atomic bombs on Japan.
Wow.
Now, they have been put in the history books as far as military because of the atomic weapons, the only group that has ever used the atomic weapons, hopefully the last one. But they also may be put in the history books for the only group to have dealt directly with alien technology or aliens from another location.
So the 509th is walking on very special ground.
They are. They
Yeah.
very are. They sure are.
Tell me, how many people would you expect to see inside a B-2? Because looking... That would be all?
Mm-hmm.
Just 2 guys?
Yeah.
Wow.
On the long missions, I don't know if they have room for more than 2, but, they can go anywhere in the world now because they can be refueled in flight. And they may have, and I don't know this for a fact, so I shouldn't say it, but they may have a double crew because you're talking, 16, 18, 20 hours of flying time to get there.
Yes.
That's a good question, but as far as I know, it's 2.
No, I was thinking when you were talking about Enola Gay, I think there were about 5 guys on that flight.
At least, yeah.
And one of them had to put the bits and pieces around the first, and the second bomb, actually. They virtually had to assemble it when they had the plane in flight.
Walter Halt was the public relations officer at the base, and he's the guy that wrote the article that went out public saying we had captured a flying saucer. That was under orders of Colonel Blanchard, the base commander and the head of the 509th. And I did a long interview with Walter before he passed away. He flew B-36s and B-29s over Japan, 35 missions. In fact, he dropped the instrument in the mushroom cloud when it was tested in the Pacific. And he was the bombardier. And the way he explained the job to me was that he would sleep on the way to the target area. And when they approached the target area, the pilot or the co-pilot would kick him. He sat up front, wake him up. He'd set his bomb sights. He'd drop the bombs, and he'd go back to sleep when they went back to their home base.
You think of the enormity of what they were doing, and he could go to sleep in it. You have to salute the man, don't you?
Well, I asked him, about to me, the consciousness of dropping the bombs could have been a problem, but his immediate response was, you remember Pearl Harbor. And he said we had a job to do, and that's what we did.
Jeff has called us from Manchester, and he wants to talk to you about Area 51.
Okay.
Hello, Jeff.
Good morning, Mike. Good morning, Dennis.
Thank you. Good morning.
Yes, one quickie. Do you know the book by Colonel Philip Corso about the Roswell incident, for example?
Not only the book, but I met him 3 times.
Right. How much credence do you put on what Corso says?
I'd like to believe a lot of what he says, but because there are no references in the back of the book, and we have not been able to validate a lot of the things he said right now, I have to keep him in my gray box. He made it sound almost too simple, the way he explained the technology, how he got the technology into different industries, and it's very possible. However, a book of that magnitude, I would think, should have references in it. It was co-written by Bill Burns, and we don't know how much of the book was written by the co-author and how much was written by Corso. I met him 3 times before he died. I liked the guy, very likable. He was very popular in Italy, had a distinguished military career, and I've tried to figure out why he would have gone public with information like that if it wasn't true.
What information are we talking about, gentlemen?
He talked about having seen the bodies in Kansas when they were being transferred to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and that today we have fiber optics, microchips, night vision. All this stuff that we have today came from the Roswell craft. And he had access to the files in the Pentagon and took that information and sneaked it into industry where they could develop this stuff. Without anybody knowing where the technology came from. I have a problem with it because on the microchips, for one thing, I don't think the dates would match up as far as when microchips started, being used and being developed. Night vision, the Germans already had a night vision, the red infrared, and we were working on that after the Second World War, and then went to that green night vision, which he says is what the inside of the craft looked like. If you looked out through the craft, it had a green tint to it. You could see outside at nighttime.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Thanks to Elliot, thanks to Jason and Spence and also Spider. We're probably going to have a conversation after the news. Let me just check the clock. Yeah, it'll be after the news. When we were talking about that area that Jeff suggested, the acquisition of information, do people sometimes make the point to you that mankind has been assisted for a long, long time? Because when you look back at the vast amount of years there's been life on this planet, long before humans arrived, and you look back over it, and then you look at the last 100 years, and it's almost as if we've been fitted with nitrous oxide injection.
All the technology has come about in the last 150 years.
Yeah.
Now, with the exception of the pyramids.
We're going to talk to you about the pyramids after the news. Can we do that?
Yeah, my background is civil engineering. I retired from the Texas Highway Department. I had 33 years in civil engineering with them, 3 years in an Army engineering battalion prior to that. And we cannot today build anything as accurate as the pyramids of Giza.
All that and a lot more right after the news. You're listening to TalkSPORT. I'm Mike Allen. Call me now. After the news, we continue our conversation with Dennis Balthaser. If you'd like to speak to him, he is a very respected UFO investigator, researcher and lecturer, and you can reach him just by calling me on 08704 20 20 20 or text 81089 or email me at talksport.net. I'm Mike Allen. This is TalkSPORT.
On 1089 and 1053 AM. Around the world. Around the clock. 3, 2, 1, ignition. From the Sky News Centre, TalkSPORT on the Hour News.
The top stories from the Sky News Centre at 2.